This was something that happened to me back in the winter of 2017. I live alone in a small house in the Midwest. Actually, it's just myself and my German Shepherd, Major. I've had him since he was a puppy, so we were both pretty attached to each other. However, like many of you dog owners will know, regardless of the weather, our dogs need their exercise. So even while it snowed, we went on our walks around the block. I don't have much of a yard, back or front, and it wasn't fenced in either, so walking was our go-to. Our routine was pretty simple. We left around 7 p.m., walked through the neighborhood, looped around the local park, and then headed back home. The entire route usually took about 45 minutes. I was used to this kind of weather, so it didn't bother me to be out in it. So just like any other night, I pulled my boots and jacket on, and Major got excited as I grabbed his leash. By the time we headed out, the sun had already set and the temperature was probably in the high teens. It had just heavily snowed during the day, so everything was covered in a layer of white. If you're at all familiar with the snow, then you know that dead winter silence that comes with heavy snowfall. Late at night or early in the mornings, where everything is just still and quiet. I love that. It makes those walks a bit more therapeutic. The walk that night was fine at first, but soon after I rounded the first corner, something began to feel off. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was probably just me, with how silent it was, and me listening to too many spooky stories on YouTube. I was probably just getting myself worked up, but when Major would turn and look around with his tail sticking straight up, it didn't help my nerves. I just told myself that we were fine. Maybe there was an animal nearby throwing Major off. We were about halfway through our walk when I started hearing the crunch of snow being pressed under shoes. The thing was, it was not from me. I would stop walking or change my pattern and the crunching continued. Every time Major stopped, I would turn around and look. The fact that he would stop and move his ears told me that something was up. Dogs always know. But I wasn't seeing anyone or anything when I looked. So what was it? I just picked up my pace and was thankful that Major matched it with me. My suspicions were confirmed as we were leaving the park. We took the same path home, so when I looked down at our prints, I noticed a second pair of shoes in the snow. Sometimes they were next to mine and sometimes they overlapped. And from the size of them, it had to be a guy or someone with really large feet. I was no longer comfortable with this situation. I patted Major, telling him, "Hey buddy, we gotta go home." He knows when I'm distressed or upset, so he picked up his pace alongside me. I was constantly looking behind me, hoping to catch someone, but I never did. Whoever this person was, they were good at keeping their distance and staying out of view. That only made me feel worse. If I couldn't even catch them following me, how the hell would I be able to fight them off if they had any ill intentions? I decided to do something that was kind of stupid. Instead of continuing down the street on the left side, I crossed to the right side. Not in a crosswalk, just straight up jaywalking. Thinking that if they weren't following me, they wouldn't do the same, right? They wouldn't need to do the same thing. Finally, I crossed the street, and in the middle of the road, I looked back to see a guy walking down the street, looking over at me. There was definitely a man following me, but was he truly following me? He kept looking over at me, but continued on the opposite end of the street. This was finally enough to convince me to call someone. I know it may have been stupid, but I had no confirmation that I was being followed. I'm also one of those people that felt like someone always had it worse, and I would have been wasting someone's time if I called 911 or something like that. But now, seeing this guy, I knew that I had to call. Better to be safe, right? I called and tried to stay quiet as I explained to the operator what was happening. As I continued, the guy ended up disappearing. The only place he could have gone is through someone's yard on the other side. Now, I was worried that he wasn't in my view, but also possibly made him someone else's problem. I finally made it to my house, but between looking for the guy and talking to the operator, I wasn't paying attention to my front door. I looked over to see another guy looking down at my doorknob and messing with it. Was he trying to break in? Before I could stop myself, I let out a startled yelp, causing the figure to turn around. He had a mask over his face and a hood over his head. I felt frozen in place, not knowing what to do. Major had started growling and barking like crazy, and I heard the operator call out for me. When Major lunged at this guy, the jerk from his leash jolted me back and I started screaming. I felt like I was trying to scare off a bear. I was waving my arms, yelling, "What the hell are you doing? Who even are you?" I tried to keep my voice steady despite my racing heart and wanting to cry. I yelled at the poor operator that someone was trying to break into my house, and the more wound up I got, the more aggressive Major started sounding. Finally, with his hands up, he jumped over the side of the porch, probably not wanting to walk past Major, and the last I saw him, he was running through my neighbor's yard. I unlocked my door as fast as I could, demanded Major in, and then locked it, all while trying to catch my breath and tell the operator what had just happened. While I was talking, I could hear the sirens getting closer. The operator informed me that they were outside, so I hung up and met the cops outside. I told them what all happened. From the walk, seeing the footprints, the guy walking behind me, and then the guy at my door, too. They took notes and looked around the property, and then two of them left to circle the neighborhood. They came back and said that they didn't catch them, but they did check with my neighbor, who allowed them in their backyard. They followed them across the yard, over the fence into the road, where he must have been picked up because the footprints just stopped. But there were tire tracks in the road. One of the cops said they would circle the block for a few more hours before they left, which made me feel a little bit better. That ended up being a really long and sleepless night. Every little sound had me on edge. I'm sure Major was feeling the same way. When I looked over at my door, he was already looking over there. The cops had told me that they would reach out if they caught someone or had questions, but I never got a call from them, so I guess they were never caught. I read about people casing houses, like trying to get their pattern down and then someone trying to break in while the owner was gone. It was reported on our local news and on the Nextdoor app, so it makes me think that that's what happened to me. Part of me hopes that it was a joint effort and the other guy was just following me. Because the idea of being targeted by two unrelated guys makes me feel even worse. I ended up getting a camera that sits in my living room window, so I can at least capture them if they or someone else tries something like that again. I was back to normal for the most part, but still had troubles late at night. I tried to vary my routes more, making them shorter or taking a different path to not be so predictable, but it's harder than I thought. My work schedule was pretty well fixed, and I couldn't change that much. Sometimes I would just stick to the backyard, but sometimes Major wanted to run, so we went to the park. I just try to be better at watching my surroundings, and you definitely won't catch me without an emergency plan. So, to the two guys that winter night, I hope we never meet again, because next time, I won't be holding Major back. My friend and I saw something at Lake Cushman. When we were younger, and still to this day, very few people believe us. My family went on an annual family camping trip, typically a week after school was out, so in May or June. At the time of this event, I was 14, and being around family long term was considered lame, so I asked if I could bring a friend. Luckily for all involved, they treated my friend Claire as a second daughter and agreed immediately. I do have two younger brothers that went with us. They were 8 and 10 at the time. Claire was always sweet to them too, and we were both typically willing to play with them. Not to mention babysit as well, but I just wanted some time with someone my own age for a change. We made our own itinerary for what we would do when we got there. My parents even brought a bigger tent so Claire and I could have our own space, which was exciting. When we first got there and found our place, we set up our tent, with my dad's help, and then went off to do things on our own. We went swimming, sat at the beach with our journals, and talked. We even helped with dinner and roasting marshmallows by the fire. I will also include, since I haven't yet, that this was 2006, so I didn't have a cell phone. Claire did, but it was one of those bricks of a Nokia phone, and it was useless bringing it to the lake, so she left it at my place. It was just us and nature, so we had a lot of opportunities to use our imagination and explore the area. It wasn't until the third evening that things got freaky. Claire and I had found this little cluster of trees and low-hanging limbs. We thought it would be cool to make a fort out of it as kind of our own little space, so, with permission from my parents, we grabbed our sleeping bags and an extra sheet that we had brought, and hung them up the best that we could over the branches. Maybe we were a bit overzealous in our abilities, but we made it work and we were proud of it. We sat under it with our magazines and journals again, and talked and shared stories. We were told that we could stay there until it was dark, but that they didn't want us sleeping outside of our tent due to possible wildlife. That's when we noticed the splashing. At first we thought it was maybe someone swimming. We were still in a popular camping area, and even though it was starting to get dark, it was possible others were in the area swimming. However, the splashing sounds were wrong. It wasn't like the normal. I know that sounds weird, but if you think about what it sounds when people splash, it's kind of rhythmic while people are swimming, and then pauses like they stopped. But this sound was way too rhythmic. Like something was methodically moving through the water. It didn't speed up or slow down. There weren't just normal swooshes of water being moved as you waded in it. It was so patterned that Claire and I got it down. Splash, splash, wait 3 seconds. Splash, splash, wait 3 seconds. Over and over. I thought maybe it was someone in a paddle boat or something, but there wasn't a boat in sight. Not to mention, they would have had to go pretty far to be where we were because there wasn't a boat dock by us. After listening to it for a while and both of us wanting answers, we decided to walk towards the lake to check it out. The sun was just peeking out from behind some trees, so we had a little bit of light left. But the water was doing something I've never seen before. Usually, you can see the water lap at the shore in random patterns. You see it hitting some rocks, and the ripples coming off of it, or the divide in a ripple when it meets the driftwood sticking out from under the water. But this was different. The waves were coming in perfect intervals. Like a metronome creating what Claire and I have come to call geometric patterns on the surface that almost looked artificial. Then, we saw something glowing. They were like the bioluminescence things you sometimes see in tide pools, but deeper, and with a greenish-blue tone. They were moving in a perfect circle about 30 feet out from the shore. I remember standing there in amazement and confusion as I watched this circle of light get smaller and spiral inward. What the hell were we witnessing? The last thing we saw and heard was a low humming or gurgling sound. It was like someone was trying to hum with a mouthful of water. And in the very center of the lights, something started poking out. The more it came out of the water, the more confused I became. The closest I can get is this. Imagine if someone tried to make a swan out of broken mirror pieces, but made it 4 times too big and gave it a neck that would bend in impossible ways. Its head, if you could call it that, was smooth and reflective, like polished metal with these dark indentations where eyes should be. But it only got more bizarre. The whole thing rose up about 4 or 5 feet out of the water, but somehow never made a sound. The splashing had completely ceased. Everything was silent. You couldn't hear a single drop of water drip off of this thing and land back into the lake. You couldn't hear the splashes around it like you would when someone left the water. Even the usual nighttime forest sounds of crickets and frogs had gone quiet. Claire grabbed my arm so hard that it hurt, causing me to finally break from my trance and look over at her. And she said that she wanted to go back to my parents, and I agreed. And something about that moment told me that we should not be witnessing whatever was happening in the lake. We left our journals and our magazines at the fort, and then ran back to the camp. When we got back, my parents could tell that something was wrong, and they asked us. I told them that there was something in the water, and when my dad asked us to describe it, we were both at a loss for words. He laughed at first, not in a way to make fun of us, but more so because we were stumped. And then Claire mentioned the metallic swan thing, and both parents were back to looking at us like we just spoke in German. My dad said that we probably didn't see something right and just left it at that. We stayed by the fire for a while, too creeped out to really do anything until my brother demanded s'mores. That really got our mind off of things until it was time for us to go to bed. As you may recall, we left our fort as it was, including our sleeping bags. We didn't want to go alone, so we asked my dad to walk with us back over there, and he agreed. We all walked back there together, and as soon as we were within view of our fort, we knew something was wrong. The sleeping bag and sheets had fallen to the ground, but there was no breeze, no reason for it to have fallen. We got closer and were shocked to find everything was soaked. It was like everything had been knocked down, formed in a circle with it, almost like a nest, and in the center was a small puddle. There was no way the water could have reached where we were set up, and it certainly hadn't rained either. But there was a trail, almost like a very small and shallow trench, that led from the lake up to our fort. You could tell that the sand and dirt was still a little wet, but not as wet as our stuff. I could tell that even my dad was perplexed. I asked him what could have caused that, and for a while he didn't say anything. He just started grabbing the bedding and asked us to pick up our books. Not that I would have left them, there was no point. Everything was waterlogged. Our journals, the magazines, all of it. I was so upset, but was still just as freaked out. Was it the thing that we saw in the water that had caused that? What would have happened if we would have stayed there? As we walked back, I tried asking my dad what it was again, and he said it was probably just an alligator or something. I thought that was weird, but I also wasn't going to question him. I could see an alligator making a trail up to our fort, but I didn't understand how it could soak everything like that. Again, I know some of you are probably thinking, there are no alligators in Washington, what are you talking about? And you are absolutely right, and I'm with you on that. I understand that better now that I've looked into it, but as a young teen, all I could do was take my dad's word for it. But I know he was wrong. So, if we know it's not alligators or crocodiles, then what was it that we saw out there? To this day, My parents stand by that we either didn't see something right or we were just exaggerating details, but I know what I saw. I know that Claire saw the same thing, because we both wrote about it before we discussed out loud everything that we saw. If we were making it up, how could our description be so exact and never change over the years? All I know is there is, or at least was, something out there, creating its perfect spirals of water and lights, and no one believes us. I'm a property manager and 1 year postpartum, so I returned to my company part-time. This is fun because I get to float around to different apartment communities who need help, and just help where needed. In September, I helped at a property about an hour from my house. It's a bit of a drive, but fairly small property with relatively no big problems, so easy money for the day. I'm covering for a manager out on vacation, and of course, it's the dreaded 6th of the month. This means I'm handing out late letters and making calls, unfortunately. Definitely not my favorite part of the job, but it is necessary. The one thing I hate about floating is that the residents don't know me well. And so I'm delivering late letters and calling, and they don't even know me. Again, not my favorite part of the job, but it has to be done. So here we go. I had about 10 late letters to deliver. All was going normal and fine. Some people answer the door and say, "Yep, I'll have it paid on such and such date, sorry." Another person didn't left, so I left info on the door, but they flipped me off as I was walking away. All pretty normal stuff that just comes with the job. I get down to about the 7th or 8th person. I walk up to this apartment, and I can tell from the outside the occupants have completely destroyed this home. I smelled cigarettes, cat urine, and general mustiness before I even knocked. All the blinds were broken, blankets were up in the windows, all the works. I get up to the door, do my normal quick knock, waited about 5 seconds, and was ready to post the notice to the door. Right as I was folding it up to put it between the door partially swings open. A gentleman wearing just his boxers and a cigarette hanging out of his mouth opens the door, but he doesn't unlatch the security lock, so the door is not opened all the way. "What do you want?" he says as he's giving me a death glare, but also looking me up and down inappropriately at the same time. I explained that I was just here to deliver the late letters, and that I would be on my way now. As I'm explaining this, I notice he keeps looking over his shoulder, as if someone is standing next to him behind the door. I find this odd. It's as if someone is hiding from me, especially because this gentleman won't open the door all the way. I hear some whispering, and I'm sure he's communicating with someone. The gentleman in the doorway asks me to wait, and says he has things in his apartment that he needs looked at. I explained that I was just there for the letter, but that he can send photos into the office, and that I would get the work orders in. He begins complaining about our maintenance team and states that he really wants someone to take a look in person. At this point, I'm feeling really uneasy. Typically, I would enter and help, no problem, but between the looks this guy was giving me and creepy who knows who behind the door, I'm just not feeling safe at this point. I defer again, trying to make myself sound unimportant and say that I'm just a floating person. I can't do anything without manager approval when she gets back, so there really is no point. At this point, something catches my eye upstairs. I see a window blind move. I notice 2 additional guys upstairs who are both staring down at me. I'm so uneasy that I could be sick at this point. I tell the gentleman that I won't be entering without maintenance or the property manager present, due to it being an ongoing maintenance concern and there not being much I can personally do. He looks annoyed and finally slams the door in my face. I get back to the office, and I grabbed the maintenance supervisor for the property to chat things over regarding this encounter. The maintenance supervisor explained to me that there used to be an old man who lived in that apartment, but then his son took over the lease after he died. He told me that he's noticed a lot of strange activity and individuals around that home since his dad died, but he hasn't personally noticed anything illegal yet, so he's just let it go. He explained that they plan to make them move when the contract is over due to the condition of the home anyways. While I cannot prove something horrible was going to happen if I entered the premises, this is by far the creepiest encounter I have had in property management in 7 years. I never went on rides at amusement parks. I was the designated bag holder, the one who cheered from the sidelines, perfectly content watching my friends fly through the air. But this time they convinced me it's just a gentle, old-timey gold minecart ride, they said, laughing as they nudged me forward. I could already feel a sense of dread, but I ignored it, climbing into the rickety cart and taking a deep breath. The whole setup looked eerie, like a relic from a bygone era, with dark splintered wood and rustling metal bolts that looked like they hadn't been tightened in decades. The tracks wound through dim, rocky tunnels and hugged the edge of a cliff, looming ominously over what seemed like a drop into oblivion. As I strapped in, or tried to, my stomach sank. The seatbelt wouldn't click. I tugged at it, desperate, but it refused to buckle. Panic shot through me. "Excuse me, my seatbelt isn't buckling," I yelled, looking at the worker a few steps away. But he was already signaling for the cart to move, unable to hear me over the hum of the machinery and excited chatter around us. "Hey, wait!" I shouted louder, waving, but then he turned his back, completely oblivious. The cart lurched forward and I was thrown back in my seat, gripping the edges for dear life. My friend, noticing my pale face, looked down at my seatbelt and instantly knew that something was wrong. He grabbed my arm and pulled me closer, his own face tightening with fear. "Just hold on," he whispered as we creaked up the steep incline, with metal grinding beneath us, just climbing higher and higher along the cliff's edge. Then we plunged. The cart hurtled down the track, whipping around sharp corners, the wind tearing at us as we shot out of the tunnels into the open air along the cliff. I felt myself sliding, slipping out of the seat with every twist. My friend's hand was the only thing anchoring me, and I clung to the sides, my fingers aching as the cart rattled along, barely holding on to these ancient tracks. Inside the tunnels, shadows loomed, giving the whole place a haunted feeling. Cold, damp air rushed past, carrying the scent of rust and stone. But outside, where the cliff dropped below, my gaze was fixed on the jagged rocks hundreds of feet down. The ride swayed as it twisted around each bend, leaning too close to the edge. Every second felt like a battle to stay in my seat, my friend gripping me tighter with each sudden turn. Finally, the ride screeched to a halt, and I staggered out. My legs were shaky and my heart was pounding like a drum. The adrenaline hadn't faded. It had only morphed into fury. I saw the worker standing there completely unaware of what I had just gone through. The terror, the helplessness, all of it boiled over. I stormed up to him, yelling loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Do you realize what could have happened? I could have flown out of that cart." My voice echoed, sharp with anger and disbelief. People stopped to watch as I let him have it, pointing out how he hadn't done anything to check the seatbelts, how he hadn't heard me when I was calling for help. I didn't hold back, venting every ounce of fear and frustration right at him. His face went pale, and soon enough, a supervisor came over, taking in the situation. I saw them speak quietly off to the side, the worker looking down, nodding sheepishly, and by the time I walked away, I knew he wouldn't be keeping his job. Since that day, I have never set foot on a ride again. I'm back to being the one holding the bags and cheering from a safe distance, and honestly, that's exactly where I'm going to stay. Back in 2023, me and my partner were both living at his mom's house. Most days we'd get home from work about 5 p.m., get dressed, and then we would go to these woods in the hills just outside the town that we live in. For context, these woods as a whole are 12 miles long and 4 miles wide. There's a break in the woods of farmland and fields, creating separate woods over these hills with different names. You can walk through these woods if you want. There's paths winding through most of the woods as trails, and if you want to walk over the span of hills from one side to the other, you can. Just most of it's through the woods and uphill if you're coming from the south. The one we always went to is called Wind Down Woods. So me and my partner would go to these woods nearly every day after we finished work. Just go for a walk or a smoke or both. We went about doing our usual routine, walking around and talking about our days, following the trail in these woods that loops around a large set of trees, with more around you on the outside. It would kind of look like a messed up donut from a bird's eye view, I guess. We were walking on the path that takes you back up towards the top of the woods, point A, and that path also takes you down towards the car park once you get to the meeting point of all the paths. When we see this man in the distance walking down the path at point B. Point B are one of the trails that just goes up into the woods beyond Wind Down. We've still got to get to the meeting point of all the paths to get back to the car. At this point, he's pretty far away from us still, but I had a bad feeling because the first thing I noticed about this man when we got closer was that he was wearing office shoes and carrying a pair of hiking boots, whilst seemingly on a walk in the woods. We were talking about this as we were walking up and laughing about how strange it was. The guy was walking faster than us as he was going downhill and reached the meeting point of the paths a few minutes before we did, but we could see him the whole time. When he got to the meeting point of the paths, all he did was stand there. He didn't do anything. He just stood there and was looking around. I had a really bad feeling at this point, as he didn't even look like he was lost. He just looked like he was waiting for something. Me and my partner were pretty weirded out at this point, and were thinking about turning around and heading back down into the woods, and going back around the long way, just to get away from this guy's weird vibes. In the end, we decided that walking back down into the woods would ultimately look way too suspicious, as the man had definitely seen us walking up the path towards him the same time we'd seen him walking down. So we just kept walking up. The whole time, this guy is still standing there looking around with these shoes in his hands. Having no other choice than to walk past this guy to get to the path down to the car park, we went up and past him. Getting close to him, I saw something that worried me more than it weirded me out. The guy had a backpack on, and there was a handle coming out of it. 100% the handle of a hammer or an axe. I knew it couldn't have been anything else. He hadn't been on a phone at all the whole time we'd seen him, not even when he was just loitering around. Just more and more stuff adding up and freaking a man out. As we walked past him and started down the path towards the car park, the guy decides he knows where he needs to go without getting a phone out or a compass. Nothing. And just starts walking down behind us. At this point, I was freaking out, and so was my partner, who doesn't usually get paranoid about stuff like this because I do it all the time for no reason. But this guy was not right. There were no other cars in the car park except for mine, so he had no reason to be walking there. We were walking as fast as we could without running away from this guy, and after what felt like a lifetime, we got to the car. We locked the doors and drove off. I didn't even look back. To this day, I think about that guy and how strange he was acting, but then again, I think about how strange we were probably acting, and maybe the poor guy was simply on a walk. Well, cut to just the other week, and me and my partner are at our friend's house for their birthday just hanging out, meeting their other friends we haven't met before and having a blast. But as usual with every small group hangout, it got late and we started talking about weird experiences we'd had, and spooky encounters. Obviously, we told everyone about our encounter with this really strange man in the woods. A couple of the girls at this hangout work at a reserve called Fine Court. It's one of the woods in the hills that I've been talking about. They seemed pretty rattled by the story that we had told, and said that they had one that would make it worse, but they had to tell the group now. Plus, we needed to hear. One evening at work, E was on a closing shift with her manager, and they'd been cleaning up the cafe and doing final checks, when E's manager tells her that he's good doing the rest by himself, and that she can just go home. Well, who doesn't want to hear that? So, off she goes to her car. She sits there for a bit to chill and roll a cigarette before driving home. Later that night, she gets a text saying, "Don't ask, just come in to work tomorrow." E finds out that after she left her work, her manager had finished cleaning up like he said, and he'd gone to his car to leave. Getting into his car, a man approached him from out of the woods and started wrestling with him, trying to steal his car keys. Managing to get the man off him and get into his car, the manager drove away and called the police. After talking to police, they connected some dots of a call they'd had earlier that evening from a concerned neighbor living in a village a couple of miles from Fine Court. They reported a suspected burglary of one of their neighbors. Another call from a mental health institute in a town about as far away as ours from these woods, but from the opposite direction, saying one of their patients had escaped. It turns out, after that, the police put the whole story together. The man escaped, got a haircut, and then walked miles to this village in the middle of nowhere. Broke into this house he thought was abandoned, which was actually the home of an elderly couple. The man was completely disabled and wheelchair-bound, and his carer was his wife. The man actually murdered the elderly lady, and just left the man in the house before leaving and walking into the woods, wandering around them, and looking for someone with a car he could steal. And that's when he ended up at Fine Court and tried to take E's manager's car, running off into the woods again to find someone else. Me and my partner are so sure that this is the same man we saw acting suspicious at Winedown all that time ago, as their story was from the same month as ours was, and the time frames matched up perfectly to when we would have seen him after he tried to steal the manager's car and ran back off into the woods again. The police caught him the next day just wandering around the woods up there. He was following us back down to the car, but who's gonna jump two guys in an open space where one of us could have easily made it to the road? I think he was trying to freak us out and get us to go back into the woods when he stopped at that meeting point and was loitering around, but I don't know. This still horrifies me to this day, and I just needed to get it off my chest and share this with someone. I'm sorry if this is extremely long-winded or badly written. I promise I was doing my best to explain the story well, and tried to explain the layout of the woods as best as I could. Hey Raven, my name is JC. I found your channel after a girl I was talking to mentioned she had a glitch while riding the train home from work. I loved your content so much that I even bought a couple of your posters. Although my dog managed to get to the corners of them, they definitely have character now, I guess. For the record, I have remedied that situation. I sent them new posters. I heard you read stories about all sorts of topics, so I wanted to share a really strange recurring nightmare I had as a kid. It was so intense that I wasn't allowed to sleep over at a friend's house for years. because of the screaming and sleepwalking / sleep running that it caused. Even now at 35, it still sticks with me, and I even got a tattoo of it that covers my entire back. The nightmare never starts the same way, but one common scene is me walking through a desert at night under a full moon. I wander aimlessly until I stumble upon a small, old-looking house made of concrete that had logs sticking out holding up the roof. It feels more like a shack than an actual house. There was a big window that showed almost everything inside, but I don't think there was any glass, just open to the elements. Inside, there's a candle flickering on a tiny table, giving off an old Western vibe, if that makes sense. When I would knock on the old wooden door for help, no one would answer, and even though I felt lost and was barefoot, I never tried to push it open. It just felt wrong. As I started to walk away, I would get this eerie feeling of being watched. I would turn around and look back at the shack, focusing on the window where the candle looked strange and distorted. The distortion would change as I moved. I stopped and stared at the candle. It was confusing at first, and I couldn't figure out why this candle looked so House of Mirrors-like. Then I realized what was happening. A person, a transparent silhouette, was at the window looking at me. I could feel it staring at me. It felt like bad news, evil, maybe. And while it never tried to come outside, I was terrified that it might. We just looked at each other for what felt like an eternity. When I finally found the courage, I bolted as fast as I could, not stopping or looking back until sunlight broke the darkness, and then wandering aimlessly again until the sun was about to set. The wandering was uneventful. Just everything was black. Rocks, plants, but the sand was sand-colored. The most memorable part of this nightmare comes next. As I walked, I noticed the black agave plants around me starting to shake and grow taller, writhing, vibrating violently, but also moved as if they were dancing. They didn't reach out to grab me, nor was I afraid they would. Eventually, I came to a steep drop leading to a valley filled with even more of these dancing agave plants. But instead of focusing on those, I looked up to see two massive black sandstone obelisks towering in the distance, like skyscrapers. Above them was a huge black sun, resembling an eclipse but behaving like a normal sun. It was beautiful. I sat down on the soft sand next to the agave plants, mesmerized as I watched the black sun slowly sink between the two black, enormous obelisks. It felt like I was in a trance. However, just as it reached the middle, I snapped out of the trance and a surge of fear came over me. I then watched in pure terror as the black sun slowly made the rest of the way down, and the black agave plants vibrated even more violently. Right before it disappeared behind the horizon, I would wake up, somewhere else other than my bed, screaming and sweating. This black sun dream haunted me for years, and even now, I still daydream about it sometimes. Even if my story doesn't make it onto your channel, it did. I want to thank you for taking the time to read it. This is the first time I've ever explained it in such detail. If it does get shared with others, I'm curious, has anyone else experienced a dream like this before? Hi. I'm not sure what this story should be classified as, but I tagged it with a few options. I've always gotten depressed during the autumn time. I'm not sure if it's a vitamin D deficiency issue because of the reduced sunlight or what, but I can't sleep at night, and nothing works to keep me awake. It's like there's something draining me. This spirit hasn't always been with me. She only started appearing 2 years after I moved into my new apartment. Before you ask, no, I didn't do any spells, summonings, or use a Ouija board. From what I know, nothing I did caused this. There's something in my house that gets active during autumn, and I'm not really sure why. It could be because Samhain or Halloween happened around then, so whatever it is becomes active. I've never really heard of a ghost only showing up during a month. When it starts, I feel like there's a person watching me from my doorways, and when the doors are closed, I can still feel someone standing there, waiting for it to open. So it's making changing the rooms difficult, and I feel extremely trapped when it does. You know that feeling when you just can't leave a room? It gets worse over time. I start getting nightmares that won't stop or leave me alone, and then it turns into night terrors where you're awake but you can't move. I swear I see an old woman standing in the doorway watching me, and I know that I must fall asleep somehow because I wake up the next morning just feeling exhausted. The next night, she always gets closer to me, just to the end of my bed, and she waits for me. Gradually, it ends up to where she's standing over me, and I can see every single wrinkle in her face. Her skin is green, and her hair's a mass of gray, and she wears this long Victorian-style dress. Every tooth is sharp, and she has a smile that is far too big. She barely looks human. The longer it happens, the more my allergies get worse, and I always seem to come down with some type of illness. Usually a stomach flu or something where I struggle to keep food down. Whoever this ghost is, eventually she'll be sitting at the end of the bed and watching me, and I'm unable to move, call out for help, or do anything to stop her. If I manage to whisper for her to go away, she laughs at me and keeps going. I know what'll happen next because it happens every single year. She will climb up on my body and sit on my chest, and I will struggle to breathe. I feel short of breath and usually end up gasping. I don't know why, whether I passed out because I'm so scared or what. But I wake up the next day gasping and looking around at my empty room, and she isn't there. The end of the autumn doesn't really bring me a sense of peace because the hauntings do become worse. The old woman becomes increasingly powerful and aggressive towards me. She'll dig her nails into my face, her face now close to mine, and as soon as the season changes, she disappears. My health at this time is always low, and I seem to get sicker during the winter time, but I don't have to deal with her. I've never been able to find out the source of how or why. I live in an apartment building that was a big fancy house hundreds of years ago, so maybe she's the homeowner who's angry at me? But why just me? Why not the other residents of this place? Before people offer these suggestions, I've done cleansing on the house. I've put up protective symbols, I've prayed, I've asked a priest and witch to come to clean the house, and it's never gotten better or worse after each one tried. I've done everything I can try to keep whatever it is away. I don't know what she wants or why she comes back every year, but I'm worried that one day it'll scare me so much that it'll actually kill me. And I think maybe that's what it wants. I think I'll end up moving to see if that helps. I hope that'll put an end to it once and for all, but I don't know what I'll do if it ends up following me to a new place, because after that, I'm out of options. And I guess I'll just have to accept whatever comes. This happened fairly recently. I was trying to get a train to the city for a night of drinking with some friends. Unfortunately, the trains weren't running to the city center that day, for some reason, so they had a replacement bus service instead. And so off I toddled looking for where they'd hidden the replacement buses in the train station. After a while, it seemed like I was on the right track. Just as I'd found a very promising corridor, I heard running footsteps coming from behind me. I glanced around to find an Arabic man sprinting to a stop behind me. I know he was Arabic because he tried to offer to teach me Arabic, while I was trapped with him later. He asked me if I knew where the replacement bus service was. I replied that I was probably just as lost as he was, and I was trying to find it myself. I thought that that would be the end of our interaction, but he continued walking beside me. Fair enough, I thought. We were both looking for the same thing, so maybe he thinks we stand a better chance of finding it together. I wished that I had turned around and just darted into the bathroom or something. It turned out the corridor did lead to the replacement bus, and the driver was standing outside the doors. He assured us we had plenty of time as we were the first ones here. He opened the doors to let us in, and the bus was completely empty. I decided to take a random seat in the middle and huddled up next to the window, ready to put my headphones on. And where does this guy choose to sit in the completely empty bus? Right next to me, trapping me in a row of seats. I thought it was a little weird at the time, but figured no harm would come of it. He then asks why I'm headed to the city center. I tell him I'm meeting friends there for a girls' night out, and very pointedly put my headphones on and start finding a good song to listen to. He insists that he should join us, but I tell him it's girls only and I don't really know him. He answered that we could get to know each other and he would buy me a drink. I tell him no thanks, I just want to see my friends today. The bus has gotten moving at this point, and there are a few others on board. From there, he proceeds to badger me with questions, all of which I ignore or give one-word answers to. After a bunch of them, my replies become variations of, I just want to listen to my music now, and I'm not interested in talking, sorry. He starts complimenting my body, telling me he thinks that I'm beautiful and repeating over and over, I really like you. My only responses now are, leave me alone, every so often. And I'm visibly shrinking away from him as he's leaning closer. The bus driver doesn't seem to know where he's going for his next stop, and the city center is ages away. I'm trapped in the seat and starting to really panic. He starts stepping up to, I love you, and leans right up to me, making kissing sounds with his lips. And that was the moment my hero intervened. It was a man around my age sitting a few seats back. I'll quote what I can remember of the conversation. Excuse me, mate. She asked you multiple times to leave her alone. The creep said through gritted teeth, screw off. The hero said, you need to move away from her. You're clearly bothering her. Mind your own business. We're fine. Do you want him to move? Me, practically pinned against the window, getting pretty scared. Yeah. The creep gets up and storms up to the man. Do you want to fight? Do you want to effing go right now? And the hero said, nah, I'd rather you control yourself and leave her alone. The creep is visibly ready to start throwing punches when the driver calls back, asking if there's a problem, and if he needs to kick anyone off the bus. The creep quietly says no and moves to a few seats behind my hero, much to my relief. I mouth several thank yous to my hero, who just smiles like it was no big deal. The creep then tries following me off the bus, but my friends meet with me, so he walks off. I'm just so glad that my hero intervened when he did. I just turned 40 and had a relatively healthy, active lifestyle. I ate right, worked out 5 times a week, and had a busy schedule at work as a very busy hairstylist. Looking back at hindsight, I already started to get subtle symptoms of an illness on set, but at this time didn't know what it was. Prior to turning 40 in the past 5 years, I would get subtle symptoms like a flash fever that would last moments and then go away, chronic low-grade headaches, and feeling super fatigued. I would also have short bouts of being dizzy, and all of these things occurred randomly, so I just chalked it up to a lack of sleep or being super busy at work. Then it started to affect my vision, and I started getting these weird auras. I still didn't think anything was wrong with me. It was early September 2010, and I remember this day like it happened yesterday. I got up from bed, but was just so winded that I had to sit on the edge of my bed to catch my breath. That, and feeling dizzy at the same time, so I finally got my energy up to get ready for work. I made my lunch, packed my computer, and off I went to the car as my partner was driving me to work this morning. So as we were driving, apparently I passed out a few times, and my partner knew something was wrong and drove me to the local hospital. When we arrived at the hospital emergency room, I was admitted immediately, as they checked and my heart rate was off the charts. I was dizzy, feeling really fatigued, and I didn't realize I had a gray pallor complexion. I was brought in immediately and was placed in an examination room and was to wait there for the doctor. My partner left at this time as he had errands to run. So I waited and waited. Then a doctor came in to examine me. I still remember this doctor that came in. He was of African descent, about 5 foot 9 inches tall, about mid-40ish, and wore these rather large, shiny gold-rimmed spectacles, reminiscent of the style from the 70s. I thought to myself, how unusual it is for someone to be wearing this type of style. Are they in fashion again? They were so shiny gold that they were sparkling. Even as sick as I was, I still had my faculties, and it wasn't because the illness was affecting my eyesight. So, he examined me, and to my shock, his hands were ice cold. He went through all the medical rounds and said to me not to worry and that everything will be okay. Then he left, never to return. I was then admitted to the hospital where I stayed for almost 2 months before being diagnosed with a rare form of B-cell lymphoma. Only 2% of diagnosed cases survive this type of cancer, and I was in stage 4. After going through round 3 of chemo, and this was late December, now after Christmas, the chemo didn't work, and I started getting tumors in my abdomen. The oncologist decided to ramp up the chemo, and the dosage would be much higher and more aggressive. So aggressive with the first treatment that I lost all feeling in my legs, hands, and arms, and could no longer walk without assistance or a walker. I was told that I would never be able to do hair again, and that I would be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. I was also told that if this more aggressive chemo didn't work, I would have about a month to live. I had to accept this as my fate. I mean, what can you do when a doctor tells you this? I had a spiritual awakening and accepted my fate. I do believe in miracles, and within about a week, the tumors in my abdomen had gone away. So I continued with this second series of aggressive chemotherapy. By the end of my chemotherapy at the hospital, I found out that I was fast-tracked to get a bone marrow transplant at another hospital. So the time came for me to transfer to the new hospital where they have an extensive bone marrow transplant center. Prior to being transferred, I spoke with the head nurse of the floor as I wanted to give thanks for those that really took care of me. I asked the nurse if I could speak to the African doctor that saw me in the emergency department, as she had worked at this hospital for more than 30 years plus. She looked at me with a puzzled look on her face. She knew practically everyone in the ER, and she told me that there was no such person that worked there. Was I visited by an angel or a ghost? The apparition that visited me was in physical form. He touched my wrist to check my pulse. I was shocked and amazed. After my bone marrow transplant, it was a success, and I beat stage 4 rare lymphoma, and am now in full remission. Looking back now, the apparition that showed itself to me said that I would be okay and to not worry. I never, ever thought I was going to die from this illness, as that is what I always thought despite the harshness of the treatments and side effects. I always knew from that incident that it was going to be the hardest thing to go through, but that I would also not die. I beat the cancer, and am in full remission, and I do not use a wheelchair as my hands and legs are now usable. And I've even gone back to work. Hi, Raven. I want to share an unusual event that happened recently. I'm not sure how you'd categorize this, but I trust you'll find a way. So on October 27th of 2024, I was unloading the dishwasher and doing meal prep for the work week ahead. I was listening to a podcast about angels to entertain myself while completing these tasks. The woman in the podcast explained that people can manifest what they want by connecting to their angels and spirit guides, and asking them for exactly what we want or need. She went on to explain that our angels and guides want to help us, and they want us to manifest positive things in our lives. As I listened intently, I made a concerted effort to keep an open mind, without dismissing her claims altogether. I've shared several stories that you have beautifully narrated for your audience. These stories involved glitches, paranormal experiences, astral projections, and visitations. A few of these stories were about my aunt that passed in 2015. The story that I'm sharing with you now is also about her. You see, I was extremely close to this aunt, and since her passing, visitations, astral projections, dreams, signs, and unexplained experiences have only increased. From the time I was 11 years old to her deathbed moment in March of 2015, my aunt promised that she would never leave me. In fact, when I was very young, she would lovingly tease that she'd haunt me after she passed. She also had a great sense of humor. She said that she would haunt me from the afterlife as a way of getting me to behave myself or comply with a request. Mostly it was a light-hearted way of telling me, a spicy little girl, that she'd always be with me, even after she was gone. I don't think she wanted to make it a conversation about death. So, as I listened to this woman on the podcast, I began thinking about my aunt and about some of the life challenges I'm currently experiencing. These challenges are nothing too horrible, just the usual run-of-the-mill challenges that life presents. Then I thought, why not? Why not give it a try? Why not ask my angel, who I assume to be my aunt, to give me a sign that she's around to help? I've had experiences and signs my whole life. Why should this be any different? Why not see if she really is around and willing to help? You see, since I was 4 years old, I've been what some called highly intuitive. I've seen angels, had glitches, out-of-body experiences, astral projections, visions, and a multitude of signs. I've experienced premonitions both in dream and awake states. My premonitions have come true on a global scale and on a personal level. I had experienced premonitions with no rhyme or reason, or supporting evidence as to why any of these events would transpire. They just sort of happen, out of the blue. Based on all these experiences, one would assume that I wouldn't be a skeptic of the supernatural or of unexplained phenomena. One would think I'd be extremely open to that which we cannot see or explain. Oddly enough, even with countless otherworldly experiences throughout my life, I admittedly still had doubts. I mean, seriously, how could my aunt, who's been gone for nearly a decade, answer me on command from beyond the veil? Could she? By now, you and your listeners can see that although my skepticism was at the forefront of my mind, I was at least willing to test the ideas the woman on the podcast was suggesting. Although what I really wanted to do was test my aunt. I wanted to see if she was actually listening to me in that moment. I wanted to see if she was really there for me and would never leave me, like she promised. I wanted to see if she really had the ability to manifest a sign that would communicate her presence on my command. I decided to give it a go, Why not? What was there to lose? So right there, in my kitchen on a beautiful fall Sunday afternoon, I spoke out loud to my aunt. I audibly said, "If you can hear me, I want to see a fox. Now." I live in a coastal area of New England. My home is on a peninsula, so there's more water around us than forest or heavy foliage where fox are typically spotted. That's not to say there aren't fox in our area. There are, but they are seen quite sporadically. In fact, I've seen a fox 2 or 3 times in my backyard in the last 5 years. I specifically asked my aunt to see a fox, knowing that it would be a long shot for her to conjure a fox, and simply make it appear in my field of vision right on command. After saying it aloud, I started looking out the kitchen window. And then I walked a few feet over to the slider and took a good long look around my backyard. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a fox and I felt hopeful. But it was just a fallen pile of reddish-orange leaves that collected and poked out from underneath one of our evergreen trees. I continued to unload the dishwasher while peering out the kitchen window every few seconds. My skepticism increased with each passing glance. So, I just continued to unload the dishes and put them in their respective places. No more than 2 minutes from the time I asked to see a fox when suddenly a fox appeared. I couldn't believe my eyes. Right there, in my very kitchen, was a fox. No, it was not the kind of fox I was expecting to see, but it was a fox nonetheless. While unloading the dishwasher, I reached in and picked up a small collection of appetizer plates in the dishwasher to put them back into the kitchen cabinet. In that moment, something told me to look down. So, I complied. When I looked down and saw what was in my hand, I was speechless. Right there on top of the small appetizer plate that I was holding was a picture of a fox. I couldn't believe it. It was truly unexpected. I never imagined that it would happen, like virtually on command. I was imagining a fox, like a real live living creature. Not a picture of one on a small appetizer plate. Certainly not one that I'd be retrieving from unloading the dishwasher. That thought never entered my mind. In that moment of shock and awe, I could telepathically hear my aunt's distinct laugh in my mind. I could clearly hear her saying with her thick accent and somewhat broken English, "You didn't think I was listening, did you? You didn't think I could do it, huh? You didn't say it had to be a real fox." I felt like she was laughing at me looking out the window and looking out the slider, but not in a mean way. It was so obvious that she was taking complete pleasure in my utter shock. She made it clear to me that she was delighted to be having a little fun with this whole thing, just as she did when she was alive. It's hard to explain how I knew she was reveling in this moment, but I fully felt it throughout my entire being. I don't think I'd believe it to be any more than a strange coincidence if she hadn't been so true to form in how she telepathically communicated her sheer enjoyment. I continued to feel an absolute awe from what I had just experienced. In the moments that followed, and after telepathically hearing her laugh and speak, I had what some would characterize as a mental download. I believe she unequivocally saw me looking out the kitchen window for a real fox, while never anticipating I would see one on a small plate. I also felt she never wanted me to doubt that she was with me, just as she promised. It seemed as if she was flexing her afterlife muscles while maintaining her sense of humor. This was her way of showing me that this was no random coincidence. It was indeed deliberate. In this download, I'm confident that she was trying to communicate that there's so much power and support around me from the other side. I simply just have to ask for help when I need it. I also got the message to be specific. It was just like the woman on the podcast had said. In retrospect, I recognize that went from a spicy little girl with countless opportunities to see and experience what others cannot, to a bit of a rigid adult, always looking for or expecting answers in the way that I anticipate. I'm often gravitating towards skepticism in spite of all my experiences. This seems to be my first line of defense. I feel comfortable with concrete answers that make sense. This is more my comfort zone. As I reflect on so many of my experiences, I realize that I need to trust in the unknown sometimes. Trust in my intuition, and I don't always need to know the why. In other words, I need to have a little more faith. I don't always have to understand or make sense of things that can't be explained, and I don't have to have all the answers exactly when and how I want them. Honestly, I'm forever grateful for this experience. I know that I'm not alone in this life. Aside from my family and friends, there are angels and guides watching over me. I also know that it's okay to call out to my angels and spirit guides. I think I've always believed that my aunt is my angel. I guess I just kind of doubted whether or not she's nearby and ready to help. This experience has taught me to trust that, although I can't see things unfolding in certain ways, or on my timetable, it doesn't mean my angels and guides aren't working on my behalf. I hope this experience serves as inspiration for your listeners. I'm sure their angels and guides are around them, waiting to be called upon for help. And may your angels be with you too, Raven. Thanks. This might be a little too creepy, or maybe gory for some, but it's still something I wanted to share from back when I was younger. My dad and grandfather, and probably further on down that line, all enjoyed ice fishing. It was something that has always just been a part of my dad's side of the family. My grandfather talked about how on particularly bad winters, it helped them get through it and gave him the chance to get away from all the kids. So, needless to say, my dad wanted to share that same experience with me, even if it was just more for leisure than survival. I definitely didn't hate it. In fact, the cold was never a problem for me, so we went ice fishing a lot. When I was 15, my dad took me out to the same lake that we went to for years. It was one of my favorite places. It's a decent-sized lake, about 3 miles across at its widest point, and it's known for perch and pike fishing. We got there around 5:30 a.m. We went pretty early, typically before sunrise. The temp was well below freezing, but I was prepared with my heavy-duty winter gear. We'd gone the week prior and were having really good luck, so we decided to go to the same area. The ice was at least 15 inches thick, probably more so, so we drove across to get to our spot. Once we found the approximate area where we wanted to be, we got out and started walking around to determine the best spot. But during our walk, I spotted something that was a bit odd at first. There was a dark trail along the top of the lake, and in some of the snow. It was a reddish-brown against the white snow, which made it stand out. I pointed it out to my dad, thinking that it was a lot of blood, especially if it was a person. My dad suggested that it probably was just a deer or something similar that someone had caught. He made a comment about how it was kind of lazy of them to just drag something like that along, but it happens. He also said that it was possible that it was an animal attack, and that it could have just dragged its kill along as well. Either way, there was no one else around, so we had to assume they took their trophy with them, and that was it. But, to be honest, I'm not really big on hunting. I've always enjoyed fishing, but not hunting. And seeing such a straight, bloody drag mark, or bloody trail, really made me uneasy. It's something you don't really think about too deep until you're actually facing it. Anyways, we moved on and found the spot that we wanted. I helped my dad set up our pop-up shelter, watched over him as he drilled our holes, and settled in for what I was expecting to be a pretty peaceful day of fishing. My dad even let me drink coffee out there with him, which made me feel like more of an adult. But he still wouldn't let me drill the holes. He said he wanted me to wait until I was older and able to hold up the machine by myself before he would let me. So we cast our lines in, settled into our seats, and waited. The fishing seemed to be a bit slow that morning, but that happens. I was mid-sentence talking to my dad when I noticed my line had twitched. Finally, some action. I picked up my rod and began the slow process of reeling in my catch. But I noticed that it seemed pretty strong, or was at least putting up one hell of a fight. I told my dad, and he said that I probably just got lucky and continued reeling in. As the line got closer to the surface, I saw something pale in the dark water. Pale was not a color we normally saw under the ice. At first, I thought maybe it was a piece of trash or something. Maybe something that was at the bottom of the lake that got snagged on my line. But when it breached the surface, I felt my breakfast coming back up. It was a human hand. It had been severed at the wrist. The skin was almost white and wrinkled from the ice-cold water, and some of the fingers were mutilated. I dropped my pole and jumped backwards, screaming expletives that I've never said in front of my dad before. He jumped up and grabbed the pole, witnessing the same thing that I did. I watched as he carried the line over to his cooler and lowered the severed hand into it. I thought I was going to be sick, all the while my dad kept his poker face. How could that not affect him? Then I started thinking about that trail of blood that we had seen earlier. Was that from the same person? Were they alive out here, trapped? What exactly happened? My dad suggested that we call someone to let them know, so we left our shelter and chairs where we were and headed back to the truck. This was some time ago, so we didn't have cell phones on us. We had to go back to the entrance of the lake and let a ranger know what we had found, and my dad showed him the hand in the cooler that he had brought along. The ranger looked just as surprised. We waited for the police and the game warden to show up, and they followed us to our spots and to the bloody trail. They said that they would investigate further, but they asked us to leave this area of the lake so that they could section it off, saying we could go to the other end of the lake. My dad agreed. We packed up and went to the other side to try and still get some fishing in. We didn't do as well at our second choice of locations. Not as many bites, and to be honest, my head was not all there after that. And I think my dad could tell. We packed up early and just went and got a hearty brunch nearby. My dad tried to assure me that while it didn't look good, the person was probably okay since we didn't find them. If he wasn't lying in a snowdrift nearby or something, then he probably got out of there. But my question is, how did they lose their hand? Where did they go, and was that much blood really from just his hand? My dad was the guy that knew everyone, or knew someone who knew everyone else. So thankfully we did get some answers after everything was all said and done. It turns out, there was another man that had gone fishing in a nearby area. He was using a gas-powered auger to drill the holes when his thick winter glove got caught in the spinning auger a bit. Before he could hit the kill switch, the machine had pulled his hand in. He managed to walk across the lake, holding his arm, get to his truck, and drive himself to the hospital. He didn't even stop to tell someone or get help. Afterwards, he had his buddy take him back out to the lake to get his stuff, which was surprisingly still there. Those augers aren't cheap, so I'm glad that no one stole it. But that's where the hand came from, which had fallen into the water and he was unable to get to it before it went under the ice. He knew he needed to get some help and stop the bleeding, so he just left. I'm still amazed by how he did it. I can't imagine that if that had happened to me, I would be able to keep calm long enough to drive myself to the hospital. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to get his hand reattached for obvious reasons, but at least according to my dad, he was in good spirits. He ended up meeting the guy at a bar that they both went to, and since then, I never wanted to help my dad drill those holes either. I've actually used a manual one since then, but at least I have more control over it. But it still makes me nervous. Far less than a gas-powered one, though. I also understood why my dad wouldn't let me help when he did it, and why he was always barehanded and sleeves up when he did. So, that was probably one of the most terrifying experiences that I've ever had when I was younger. And to anyone else that fishes, no matter the kind, I hope that you never catch something like that. Hi, Raven. It's been a long time since I submitted a story. Mostly because I wasn't sure if I really wanted to share this part of my personal history. I've since heard 4 similar accounts to mine, and figured that maybe it's time to share so more people know they're not alone in this experience. I know it doesn't fit with the themes you've been reading lately, and I will have to censor it a bit for others' safety, but I assure you that this story isn't just a story. This happened. Also, I want to warn the listeners that this story is graphic and sensitive, so if accidental self-harm is an issue, they should skip it. It was November of 2005. I was visiting family on one of my weekend breaks from the Job Corps. I didn't have contact with my father, so FAFSA denied my application, losing my scholarship to the university I'd been accepted to. After that, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and my best friend was going to Job Corps, so I went with. I was at my brother's house, bored of the few video games I'd brought with me, and I decided to try an over-the-counter hallucinogen that one of my other siblings had done. I won't state the name of the medication, but the gist is that you take a whole box, and you'll sleep for a couple of hours and then hallucinate. The problem was, I had bought the wrong medicine. I did have the hallucinogen, but it also had other medications that could be lethal if overdosed. I fell asleep with my eyes open, waking much later than I expected. My eyes were so dry that it hurt to blink. I tried to stand up and couldn't. I crawled into the bathroom and began vomiting. My brother came to check on me, and I said, "I think I need help." Then the jaundice kicked in. My brother and his wife called the hospital. They found the packaging of the medicine and rushed me to the ER. I was so far gone that they admitted me immediately. The doctor tried to get me to drink 3 glasses of a mixture of activated charcoal and honey, but I could only hold down the first. Thinking I was resisting treatment, they put me under and pumped it in with a nasal tube. Only I woke up from the anesthesia and ripped that out. Then the doctor ordered scans of my stomach, and while I was lying in the bed waiting, I suddenly felt like I was floating. I opened my eyes and saw myself lying on the bed, with my sister rubbing my back. I was floating away with no control of where I was going. And then everything went black. I was still aware of myself, but I was no longer floating. I was in a pitch black space. I couldn't see my hands or feet, but I could feel them. I took a step forward, and it echoed. The space sounded like the inside of an enclosed concrete parking garage. I figured it couldn't go on forever, so I kept walking forward. The echo of my steps sounding like water dripping. I kept calling out, "Hello, is anyone there?" But I got no answer. I walked with my hands outstretched for what felt like hours, but I never found a wall. And then suddenly, I felt something grab me by my neck and yank me backwards. Not like a hand, but like cold water. Then I was falling back towards my body as doctors were putting paddles away. Everything then went black again. I woke the next day around noon, handcuffed to a bed in a glass room. I'd been moved to self-harm watch. The doctor came in and told me that due to the small size of my stomach and the overdose, they thought I had done it intentionally. I explained what happened, but I still had to be cleared by a psychiatrist before I could leave. The doctor told me that I had died for about a minute, but they'd been able to restart my heart. Then, they did an ultrasound and found that my stomach was much smaller than normal, and since I wasn't waking, they put the nasal tube in my other nostril and pumped the charcoal in slower, until I had digested enough to absorb the medication. The psychiatrist cleared me, but still wanted me to stay for 2 weeks, which my family was against since I would be kicked out of my program. I did go back to Job Corps, and was put in their rehab program since it was the closest thing they had to self-harm watch. I never took that medication again, as the doctor said that my body would likely see it as a harmful substance and reject it. Honestly, the whole experience changed my entire outlook on life. I had no desire to go back to the black space, and life just seemed so much more bright and colorful. The Job Corps psychiatrist also did more harm than good. They couldn't accept that I didn't want to end it, and they would put me in uncomfortable situations to try to force me to say that I did. I didn't stay there long after being released from the rehab program. I didn't graduate and just came home and got my life going. Anyway, listeners, don't be stupid like I was. If there's anything on the other side, I didn't find it. And I never did get the experience that I had intended. All in all, abusing any substance is just not worth it. And Raven, as always, thank you. I hope you don't have to edit this too much to be able to use it. This happened to me back in winter of 2021. I was looking for a way to make some extra money, and around this time, a lot of delivery places were hiring for obvious reasons. I got hired pretty quickly at one of these parcel delivery places, and the job was pretty easy. I went through those hot packs pretty fast, but otherwise, it was straightforward and simple enough. I had a later shift since my fiancée worked evenings too. That way I didn't lose any time with her, but on this night, I actually questioned my choices of going to a stranger's house late at night by myself. I was almost done with my route. I had 3 more stops to go, and then I was done for the night. The house I was heading to was in a rural area, right outside of a major city. I actually almost missed it. It was set back from the road quite a bit, with one of those long gravel driveways surrounded by trees. It was pretty typical for the area, but the trees were a little too close to the mailbox, which is why I almost missed it. Once I stopped at the mailbox, I looked down the driveway that was not lit, and immediately had this off feeling. It was about 7 p.m. and it was already dark. I could see a light on at the house, but the front and driveway was dark. To be honest, I almost skipped it. I wanted to call it in to say that it didn't seem safe, and that I would deliver it first thing the next morning. But I chickened out of that, too. I just told myself to buck up and get it over with. So, I grabbed the 2 boxes from my truck and walked up the driveway. In case anyone asks, we were not allowed to pull into driveways, no matter how long it was, so yes, I had to walk the whole thing. As I got closer to the house, I spotted a van parked right off the side of the driveway. It was off, and with it being dark, I didn't see it initially. But with how big and nice the house was, The old beat-up van definitely stood out to me now. I continued walking past the van into the porch. I put the packages down by the door, and I pulled out my phone to take a picture. As I opened the camera, I noticed movements in the side of my view. Movements out there in the dark. I looked up, and that's when I noticed the figure of a very large person standing on the other edge of the porch. I inhaled so fast that I nearly choked on the cold air and spit. I know I said something along the lines of, "Oh, sorry, man. You nearly caught me. I was just dropping off some packages." For a second, he didn't respond, and my heart rate wasn't dropping. I should not be here, I thought to myself. They may have placed the orders, but I should have just waited until daylight. He stepped a little closer, and from there, I was able to tell that he was wearing a ski mask. I assumed he lived here and was just outside for some reason, but why would he be wearing a ski mask and not speaking? I still had my phone out with the light on, and told myself the only option that I had was to run and hope to God that I made it back to my truck before he did. Then, he finally spoke. He asked if there were more packages, and if I needed help with them. He had a gravelly voice, and he seemed like he was trying to also be quiet. I told him no, and that was it. He stepped closer and asked what it was. I just shrugged and told him that I didn't know, which was true. The most I could see was if it was fragile or hazardous, just things like that. But also, shouldn't he know? This was his home, right? But then I thought, what if it wasn't? What if he was wearing the mask and standing around in the dark because he didn't live there? Did I just interrupt a possible home invasion? I didn't know what to do. Do I try to be brave, knock on the door, ask what they were doing? I decided my best option was to play dumb and hope that he didn't catch on. I looked at my phone like I was getting a call and made a comment about it being my dispatch. I put the phone to my ear and pretended like I was on a phone call and was saying things like, "Yeah, I just completed the order for 123 address. Yeah, the owner was actually waiting on the porch, so I'm leaving now." I started walking back to my truck as fast as I could, without looking scared or suspicious myself. I didn't hear anyone following, so I dropped my phone to my side and ran the rest of the way to my truck. Once inside, I shut and locked the doors. Then I got stupid and realized the people that lived there could be in danger. So instead of burning out, I called the police. To my surprise, the person that answered said they already had a unit on the way. Who called the police then? They asked me to stay there if I could and if I was safe, and I agreed. I was at least in my locked truck, so I did have a little bit of protection. While on the phone, I spotted the van coming up the driveway, but they had their headlights off. I watched as it pulled out and stopped right across from my truck and watched a guy get out of the passenger seat. If he got out of the passenger side, though, that means there was a driver. As in, there were two people at least. I watched and quietly told the person on the phone what I was seeing. The man walked up to my window and banged on it, asking, "Did you call the cops?" It sounded more like a "you better not have" than just asking. I cracked my window just a sliver and yelled, "No," and then held my phone out, saying, "I'm on with dispatch." I mean, technically it wasn't a lie. That's when I heard the driver shout out, "It ain't worth it, man, come on." The guy stared at me for an uncomfortable few seconds, and then ran back to the van and they sped off. I informed the dispatcher what had just happened, and they said the police were almost there. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, we were kind of in a secluded place, so it took longer than I would have wanted for them to get there. When they finally arrived, the dispatcher told me to step out with my hands up, so they didn't think that I was the suspicious person. I did exactly that, but it was still nerve-wracking having a gun or taser. something that could take me down, pointed straight at me. Once I explained who I was, why I was there, and what I saw, they asked me to stay there while they went to the house. After some time, they came back out and explained to me that the owner, a little old lady, had spotted someone walking around her home. No way was she going to open the door to confront them, so she went and hid and called the cops. I just happened to show up and spot them face to face. I obviously interrupted them doing something. Were they trying to break in or something worse? The cop said the owner asked to see me, and I nervously walked with the cop back to the house. The woman was standing on the porch with slippers and a robe on, and she hugged me and thanked me for the packages, because they were her Christmas gifts, and she apologized that I had to deal with those guys too. I told her it was no problem at all. It definitely was. I was scared to death too, but hey, if I had to choose them getting in there to her, or possibly beating me up, a younger guy, I guess I would rather be the punching bag. The police took my info for more questions, and then I left, saying to heck with the last 2 orders. I called my actual dispatch and explained what had happened, and they agreed. I went home and told my fiancée what happened when she got home too. I never did hear anything back from the police, and I didn't see anything about it on the news, so I'm curious if they ever caught the guys. I worked there for most of 2022, until I quit due to getting a good promotion at my actual day job. Some days I do miss those nights to myself, but then I think about this experience, and I'm thankful that I don't have to go through all that again. This happened when I was 4, so I don't remember all the minor details, but my mom does. And we kind of traced back this whole thing when I suddenly got reminded of it because of reading a similar story. I'll try my best to explain and add bits from my mom's memory. We used to live in a very rural area at that time, and we owned a small farm. Most people in that area had their own farmlands, but the houses were located about 5 miles from the area where all the farms were. It was the time when we only had one cell phone that my father used to keep with him all the time, and no landline at our house. There was a public telephone booth 2 blocks down that a lot of people in the neighborhood used. It was around summer, I think. There was this group of people, and they were notorious for stealing the crops, and would also rob people occasionally, especially women working alone at the farms. My father had a regular job besides managing the farms, so he would leave very early and would be back late at night. Normally, my mom would manage the farms by herself, but since the people were going around robbing others, she stopped going there for a while. And I was also very young then. Most people in our neighborhood worked at their farms starting early in the mornings until the evenings, so our neighborhood was pretty desolate during the daytime, except a few people 3 to 4 blocks down from our house. Mom was very careful about locking the main doors and windows, so there wasn't much to worry about. My gramps from my mom's side was visiting us one of these days, and he's like a very tall and big guy. I was playing in the dining table, my back facing the main entrance, and Mom was in the kitchen, while Gramps was in the guest room, since he had just arrived, maybe changing or freshening up. The thing was that Mom forgot to lock the main entrance after Gramps came in, and had no idea about it. I was facing my mom, telling her about whatever little me was doing, and she was facing the entrance. And I clearly remember feeling terrified by the sudden change of expression on my mom's face. Now that I'm more aware of the wide range of emotions than a 4-year-old, I can tell that it was a mixture of dread, shock, and pure anxiety. She left whatever she was doing in an instant, and now she was standing between me and the entrance, shouting with a kitchen knife in her hand. And as I peeked from behind her, there was a woman, and she had a sickle in her hand inside of our house. She was standing there trying to make conversation, as if that was normal. She definitely thought that we were the only people in the house. She was wearing lots of metal jewelry and stuff, the way that those specific people wore. Mom was telling me to run to Gramps, and I was crying, not wanting to leave her because I could probably sense the danger. It's only been like 2 minutes, and my Gramps came running and yelling from the room in the far back, telling the woman to get the hell out of our house. She was still trying to pretend and telling us stuff like she just wanted some water, and that this was a pretty house. But now she was also backing away. More yelling and shouting from Gramps and Mom, and the woman finally left. My mom locked the entrance, and now my Gramps was trying to calm her down as she was shaking a lot. My mom told me later that the most scary part was that she couldn't even notice the woman getting inside. I could have been seriously hurt or possibly taken hostage if she had noticed a bit later. And the woman didn't even flinch when it was just my mom shouting at her with the freaking kitchen knife in her hand. So she was not scared of her at all, and was most probably looking for an opportunity to take her on. My mom has a small build, and that woman was tall, like much taller than my mom, so no wonder she was prepared to take her chances. I don't know if you'd be interested in this, but it's something I witnessed as a child. Too many times, not only when I was a child, but now as an adult. People have told me that I'm probably just exaggerating on some of the details, or that I was mistaken. But I know I wasn't. I saw this thing several times, and at the age that I wasn't scared of it. I was more curious, which gave me the opportunity to look at it more, and it seemed to realize that I wasn't afraid of it either. I used to spend many summers at my grandparents' old farm in rural Missouri. Both my parents worked a lot, so it was easier to have me stay there for the week, or part of it, and then come home to be with them on the weekends. I didn't mind it though, because I loved my grandparents and their property. They had 2 German Shepherd mixed dogs. I would spend hours outside with them, playing fetch, hunting for bugs or other cool finds. They even had an old barn, but their days of farming were long gone. I rode on the tractor with my grandfather when he was mowing the lawn before, but that was about the gist of farming for them. Well, that and their old cow, Daisy. She was a dairy cow, but she was very sweet, like a really big dog, so even after they sold the rest of the herd, my grandpa couldn't bring himself to get rid of her too, and she became another pet. She just got her own home in the old barn. I also loved Daisy. I would often go into the barn and pet her or brush her. They would let me feed her carrots or an apple too. On those particularly bad days, like if I was in a bad mood, I would just sit in there with her and read out loud, and it always made me feel better. This event took place when I was 9. I was in the barn playing something. I remember I had found an old bucket and was pretending to feed all the animals in the barn, talking to them as I went down the line. Then I caught something moving in my peripheral near the back of the barn, where the light from the hayloft window came in. When I turned to look at it, I saw what I initially thought was a person crouched behind some old farm equipment. Except I soon learned that it wasn't a person. At least, not like any I'd ever seen. The proportions were all wrong. It was about the size of an adult human, but its body looked soft. Not like it was necessarily fat, but soft like gelatin. Its skin was pale and slightly translucent, like those salamanders that are found in caves It had no hair on its body, but even on its head or face, and its limbs seemed to fold in ways that limbs shouldn't. Like I mentioned earlier, I wasn't scared of this thing. That's the strange thing about being a kid. You haven't quite yet learned what should or shouldn't exist, what truly is weird or just something you just don't know about. So I stopped what I was doing and I stared at it. The thing is, the thing stared back. Its eyes were gray and cloudy. I remember them so specifically because it reminded me of a pair of marbles that I had at home from a game. After staring at each other for some time, it ran off and exited through the back of the barn. I had to be back in the house before it got dark because they didn't have many lights around the property. The sun was starting to set, so after the thing took off, I slowly walked to the back of the barn, closed the little door, and left through the front. Once I got back inside, I very calmly told my grandparents about what I saw, and asked what it could have been. Both of them assumed that it must have been a stray cat or dog that was just really sick. I tried explaining that it was a lot bigger than that, and the most I got out of them was, oh, well, maybe it was a sick deer. And that's about where the conversation ended. They were the adults after all, so why shouldn't I believe them? They probably knew a lot more than I did. The second time I saw it was about 2 weeks later. I remember going home for the weekend at least twice in between there. The second time it was in the evening again, just before sunset. I had already gone back in the house, but I realized I had left something in the barn. Between bugs, mice, and sometimes even the weather, I didn't want it to get messed up, so I just thought that I would run back in there and grab it really quick. This time, I heard this wet squish sound, and looked around to see where it had come from. And that's when I saw it. It was actually perched on the loft floor above the barn, staring down at me. I remember it was nearly dangling above me. And when I say dangling, I mean its flesh. The pink soft tissue was drooping so much that it reminded me of slime. But I could tell that it was still attached. All it did was stare at me with its cloudy eyes. I tried to call out to it this time and ask, "What are you?" But it only seemed to be afraid of me. It pulled backwards and I could hear the scattering upstairs. I walked a little closer to the ledge where the ladder was, but then I saw the fat ball of whatever it was practically tumble down the ladder and speed out the back door again. I'm not exaggerating on that either. It looked like what you would expect a ball of dough to do if it was poured down a ladder. What could that be, and how could it still be alive? Or alive enough to have eyes and run away? This time I ran back to the house, and once again told my grandparents about it, and their first thought was that I shouldn't have been in there since it was getting late. I explained to them why I went back, and again tried to tell them what was out there. My grandma didn't really respond. My grandpa mentioned something about there being a lot of animals out there that are sick, and that there are too many for humans to keep track of, and just left it at that, as if that explained everything to my little 9-year-old brain. I didn't see the creature for the rest of that summer. There were a few times that I went in there really early hoping to catch it while feeding Daisy, but the only new thing in there was the smell of wet bread that had been left out too long. It was like that soured smell of yeast and mold. I wish that I could have seen it more as a child. I thought if it was some kind of bizarre animal, then maybe I could befriend it. But the size alone is what startled me. Now, as an adult and going into the barn for the last time after my grandparents' passing, that thing had to be the size of at least a teenager, based on just how much space it took up on the ladder alone. But for some reason, I was not afraid of it, not once. It did startle me when it ran away, but that was it. Now I think about it, and I wonder what would have happened had I tried to get closer or touch it. My parents and grandparents, while they were still around, all thought that I was exaggerating some of the details, but I still remember them clearly. I remember its size, those eyes, and especially that smell. I just want to know if someone else out there had experiences with fleshy animals that may have hung around at barns. So I know that I wasn't alone in witnessing something so bizarre. I've never written this out before, so forgive me if I'm not great at putting the words into writing. When I was around 10 years old, my mom, dad, brother, dog, and I had lived in a crappy apartment that wouldn't let us keep our dog. So, my parents found a house to rent. I don't remember ever seeing this house before we moved in, but I remember the night before my brother and I went to see it. My mom had left our dog, Zoe, at the house overnight by herself in a dog crate. I'm not really sure why they decided to do that, but the next morning my dad went to work while my mom, brother, and I went straight to the house to deep clean it, before we brought the furniture in. I remember the outside of the house. It was a 2-story house. The outside had a log cabin look to it, and the whole house was brown. Anyway, once inside, my mom unloaded the cleaning supplies, and as it was my brother and I's first time seeing and being inside the house, we raced upstairs to pick out our rooms. I remember the upstairs had 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The room I looked at first was small but had a good view of the backyard. I checked the closet, and I remember barely being able to see the shelf above where the clothes would hang, and I could see something. I jumped and pulled on it, and a pile of magazines fell. All of the magazines had nudities, so I left them. Then I went to the room that my brother was in, and the closet door was open, and from the hallway, I could see another stack of magazines. I didn't want to see the type of magazines that were in the other closets, so I left them. My brother and I didn't get to check the master bedroom or the bathrooms before my mom called us downstairs to help her clean. Now, mind you, Zoe was still in her cage so we could clean. She was a Jack Russell, so she would shed quite a bit, hence keeping her in the cage. And my dad was not at the new house with us, he'd gone to work, so it was just my mom, brother, me, and Zoe. We'd been upstairs for about 10 minutes, and had been helping my mom clean for what couldn't have been more than 5, when my mom told us to stop moving and be quiet. I didn't hear anything but Zoe growling, and then, over her growling, I could hear loud stomping coming from upstairs, as if someone was taking huge steps and stomping with each stride. They started off slow and then eventually sounded like full-on running down the stairs. My mom obviously didn't want to stick around to find out what was now running full force down the stairs. My brother ran for the front door. I'm not sure why, but I didn't run. My mom grabbed the cage that had Zoe, now barking in it, and my arm, and pulled me out of the house. I remember tripping on something and falling, but my mom still had my arm and yanked me up, and I looked back, and nothing was there for me to trip over. We ended up going to my aunt's house. She lived right down the road from the house. We stayed there until my dad got off work, and then we all, my aunt and cousin came with us too, went back to the house. My dad went in and checked each room, and then we went in after him. I remember my dad found the dirty magazines in the room that I had looked at, and then he went into the master bedroom where my mom and dad had hidden a small door behind the closet door. I never went in the closet, so I don't know what he and my mom found in there, but I do know that we never moved into that house. Hey Raven, I've got a story that's been haunting me for a few years. It happened when my friends Scott, Dan, and I went hiking deep into the forest, far away from anyone, just surrounded by nothing but trees and silence. It started as a regular hike, but by the end of it, we had encountered something that none of us can explain. We were making our way through a thick part of the woods, chatting away, when we heard it. A deep, earth-shaking roar. It wasn't like any animal that I'd ever heard before. It was low and guttural, like a lion, but different. We froze on the spot, exchanging uneasy looks. "What is that? Is it a bear?" I whispered. Dan shook his head, putting his finger to his lips, gesturing for us to keep moving. After a tense moment of standing still from fear, we did keep moving, though none of us could shake the feeling that something was watching us. The forest seemed darker, and the usual sounds of nature felt muted. A few minutes later, Dan, who was leading the way, suddenly stopped and pointed ahead. "Guys, you need to see this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. What we saw made my stomach turn. Lying ahead of us was a deer that had been completely torn in half. Not like a predator had killed it, but as if something had just pulled it apart with pure strength. Like it was nothing. Blood covered the ground, and parts were spread unnaturally far from each other. There was something sickening about the way this poor creature had been killed. But that wasn't all. There, caught on a nearby branch, was long, thick brown fur. It wasn't from the deer, and this was coarse, like it belonged to something much bigger, something that shouldn't have been out there, something like an ape. We didn't even have time to process it before Dan spotted a massive footprint in the mud, right next to the scene, that was far too big to belong to a human, with deep, heavy impressions. The print looked fresh, like whatever made it had just been there. It almost looked human, but it was much bigger. The thing would have had to have been at least 9 foot tall or larger, and then the smell hit us. It was disgusting, like rotting meat mixed with a wet dog. The air felt thick with it, and it was enough to make us gag. The stench hung in the air like a warning, letting us know that whatever did this was close, and it wasn't something that we wanted to meet. "This isn't a bear," Scott muttered, backing away. He was right. Bears don't tear animals apart like that, and they don't leave prints like what we were seeing. I could feel my heart racing as Dan, wide-eyed, said the words that none of us wanted to hear. Sasquatch. Before any of us could react, we heard that roar again. It sounded closer this time. It was so loud and deep that it felt like it shook the ground beneath us. I felt a chill run down my spine, and we all knew that we had to leave. Now. We ran, hearts pounding, tearing through the forest as fast as we could. The whole time it felt like something was following us, like we were being hunted. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet except for the echo of that terrifying roar behind us. Even when we reached the main trail, that fear did not leave. To this day, we don't talk about it much, but none of us have forgotten that footprint, the hair, or the deer. It was something beyond explanation. Hey Raven, I've got a story for you. Back from the 90s, when books were still a thing to learn from, there was no Google in sight. This all began one evening in my room as I was prepping for my science class. Now, I was a bit of a nerd, glasses, braces, the works, always aiming to get my work done ahead of time. Procrastination just isn't my style. So there I was, flipping through my textbook, when something strange caught my eye. Certain letters and words were highlighted in neon yellow, a color I never use. I always highlight in pink because, well, pink's awesome, right? Those letters spelled out, "Avoid the lab tomorrow." A bad gut feeling gnawed at me, but I shrugged it off. I mean, it was probably just a prank, right? Those stupid knuckleheads are always poking fun at me in class. The next day, that bad feeling only got worse. By the time my science class was about to begin, I couldn't shake the sense of dread. So I made an excuse and headed to the sick room to lie down. As I lay there staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't help but notice how it was yellowing and old with little cracks running through it. The place had definitely seen better days. I shifted uncomfortably, thinking about how many sick people had laid on these sheets before me. Ew. I'm a bit of a germaphobe. This made me eager to get out of there, so I swung my feet off the bed and planted them on the floor. That's when it happened. The piercing sound of a fire alarm. My heart jumped as the pungent smell of smoke filled the air. I was quickly rushed outside. As I stood there watching smoke billow from the science room with all the other students, a chill ran down my spine as I realized how close I had come to being in that room, standing in the exact spot where a Bunsen burner had exploded. That was my station, my spot. I couldn't help but wonder, was someone trying to hurt me or help me? Months passed and I kind of forgot about the whole science thing, and then one morning I woke up with a searing pain in my mouth. My braces had broken and a wire had scraped my gums. Oh great, I thought. I'm going to miss school. And it was the day of our excursion to an art gallery, no less. I was really looking forward to that, as art is kind of my thing, you know? So off I went to the orthodontist to get my braces repaired. I came to school later that day and saw some of my friends crying in the hall. I asked them what had happened, and they said that there had been an accident. The bus that had gone to the excursion had quite a bad accident on the way home, and several kids got hurt. I couldn't believe it. As I listened to my friends, a strange thought crossed my mind. Was there someone really out there protecting me, or was this just a fluke of good luck? As I was walking home from school, I patted my pockets and realized I didn't have my purse. Panicked, I remembered I had left it in the library while helping a friend with an assignment. Annoyed, but with no other choice, I turned to go back to get it. As I retraced my steps, little did I know that it would save me from being at the intersection where a car ran a red light. If I'd kept on walking with my purse in my pocket, I would have been in the path of that car. And just like that, it was another near miss. I couldn't believe it. I really do think that I'm being looked after by something. Or someone. I just hope fate's not out to get me. Like in those horror movies when the characters can't escape their death. Well, it's been more than 20 years now, so I guess death got busy. Chasing someone else, I guess. I'll find out sooner or later. Hi, Raven. I've been listening to your podcast for quite a long period of time, and I have this interesting story that is really scary and still gives me goosebumps when I think about it. I almost remember every single detail of that day. So basically in 2020, me and my husband were at a furry convention, and I was just walking around without my husband trying to find sirs. And then, like, the whole entire world froze or something. I don't even know what happened, but like basically just everyone at the convention like disappeared. I heard this horrible sick moaning, so I went to investigate it, and I went to this strange back room. There was this tall, thin, pale thing or something with pure black eyes, curled up in a ball with its mouth wide open, and it didn't have any teeth. It definitely wasn't a human. And it had this awful, dusty, fishy, kind of moldy smell coming from its mouth. I couldn't move at all. Then this creature came up to me and stood in front of my face for what seemed like 4 hours. Then everything went back to normal, and it was just like nothing had happened. I was walking around the convention with my hubby again. I honestly don't know what happened that day. I saw that creature another time when I went to another furry convention, and the exact same thing happened. But this time, instead of it being a palish white color, it was reddish and had white eyes. I don't know if it was the same creature or something related to it, but I'm super scared to go back to furry conventions with my husband. It only happens when I go to a convention with Sirs. This experience has completely traumatized me a little because now I have a fear of everything and I can't really do anything without feeling like I'm being watched because I smell that same dusty, fishy, moldy smell that came from its mouth. I'm really curious if anyone else has seen an interesting creature like this at a furry convention or just any time at all. I have no idea what this was. Maybe some kind of glitch in the Matrix allowing me to connect with demons from hell or something. Or maybe a ghost or something. Please, just let me know, and thanks for reading my stories. I love your stories so much, Raven, and thank you. Thank you as well. I was recently called home due to my father's imminent passing. I stayed at my parents' house while waiting for the inevitable. One night, while I was having trouble sleeping, a light in the room came on. I thought nothing of it at first, thinking someone had turned a light on down the hall. But after a minute or so of not hearing any commotion, I sat up in bed to investigate. It was the monitor for my mom's computer, which was at the far end of the room that I was sleeping in. It acted as if someone had touched the mouse, deactivating the power save mode of the monitor. The screen showed one of the random pictures that would appear on her desktop. I got up and turned the monitor off because I knew it would take quite some time before it re-entered power save mode. This is an important detail for later. My mother has always been interested in the afterlife. Before he passed, my mother asked my father to do something after he passed to let us know it was him. In the day immediately after he passed, there were several power glitches in the neighborhood, but no storms or strong winds, or any other obvious reasons for them. Fast forward to a week after he passed, around 4 o'clock in the morning after the graveside service, while I was still sleeping at my mom's house, I had a strange dream. In it, the family was gathered in a large house and everyone had gone to bed, including me. At that point, I had a dream within a dream. In that dream, I saw my father get into a car and get into an accident. After that, the scene changed and went completely black with yellow squares, opening that morphed into a circle. There were wavy distortions as if it was an underwater scene. Through that opening, I saw my father float up and support himself with his hands at the surface of this opening. He appeared happy and healthy, looked straight at me and said, "The spirit world needs me." Then he let go and floated back down. That caused me to immediately bolt awake. In the dream. Now only one dream level deep, I got up, went to where the supposed car wreck happened, and saw nothing eventful. Relieved, I went back to bed, and then I awoke in our current reality. While I lay there contemplating the wild dream that I just had, a light came on in the room. I lifted my head to see that it was once again my mom's monitor. Again, showing one of its random pictures. I didn't have my glasses on, but from across the room it appeared to show a photo of the planet Mars. I knew that I'd have to get up to turn the monitor off again, just like I had the previous week, so I sat up in bed. But before my feet even touched the floor, the monitor reverted to power save mode. Was all this a message from beyond? I don't know, but as I sat there, I found myself saying aloud, "Thanks, Dad." This happened back in the summer of 2008, in a little town of Wind Ridge, Pennsylvania. I was 13 at the time and off from school for summer vacation. I had all my homework done for when school got back in sessions, so I had all the time in the world to goof off. Plus, my mom and dad were out of town at this country music festival called Jamboree in the Hills, like they go to every year. But the added bonus this year was that I was finally old enough to stay by myself, so I had the whole house to myself until they got back. It was a nice summer day. The sun was shining, a nice cool breeze was blowing, kind of refreshing really. My aunt had just brought me back home from getting a haircut and taking me to Burns Delight for lunch and ice cream. I'm all dressed for the summer. A pair of black shorts, a pair of black Crocs, a white tank top really showing off the gains I'd been putting in for when wrestling season rolls around. Gotta keep my top wrestler position on the team. I figured I would enjoy the day by hanging out on our front porch and playing some Mega Man ZX on my DS. It was an extra treat that my best buddy in the whole world, / cousin, got to stay with me during this too. We've been super close since forever, and had a lot of similar interests, like both being big fans of anime. He's a bit of a stockier guy, but didn't let that affect his confidence any. He's a bit shy, but funnier than heck once you get to know him. He was sitting beside me on the porch swing, a bottle of Pepsi in his hand. He had his laptop on a table in front of us, watching some Squidbillies. Now, my house is in the middle of nowhere on a hill, surrounded on 3 sides by deep, dense woods. The only side not covered by woods is the front, which is where our driveway snakes down the hill to the road. I was entranced in my game when my cousin jostled my arm. I looked up and asked him what it was. He pointed down at the road and asked if that was a bear or not. Well, all I saw was this big black thing just slowly coming down the road on all 4s. It was bigger than any bear I had seen on any nature show. It was also super muscular. We're talking muscles on top of muscles here. The darkness of its color was also kind of strange because it was so deep black. Well, this thing must have felt us looking at it or something. It turned its head toward us, and that's when my heart dropped. The face looked like that of a wolf, in a way, but also something about it looked human. It's hard to put into words. I kept my eyes on it the whole time. It stood upright, and this thing must have been 9 feet tall. It then just let out this human-sounding scream that drained all of the color from my body. That's when another one of these things came running down the road. It was soon joined by another one. It was a smaller one. It came to the larger one's shoulders. It had dark brown fur and looked more slender and female, to be honest, for some reason. It had the bloody head of a doe in its maw. Wrapped in its razor-sharp claws, soaked in blood, was the rest of the doe's body. Or what was left of it. It was missing some pretty good-sized chunks and 2 legs. I couldn't even move. I was frozen in place with fear, locking eyes with this thing. My cousin was cowering behind me, both of his hands clasped onto my shoulders as he slowly peeked his head over my shoulder. I could only back slowly towards the door along with my cousin who had the similar idea. These 2 monsters soon take off down the road, but I thought they were going to flank the house or something. That's when we booked it back inside. We spent the rest of that day running around, locking doors and looking out windows to see if they ever would come back, but they didn't. We didn't even dare go near the sliding door in the living room, and we tried our hardest to pull the curtains over it without being in the eyesight of the woods as hard as possible. I was walking the 4 blocks to the JCC by my house, and meeting my two best friends who were sisters, D and B. I was walking and feeling relaxed because I had walked to the J a million times before. I started walking past a small empty office building, and that's when I noticed a dark car idling way in the back. The car had tinted windows, and the driver rolled down his window and said that I was very beautiful, and asked if I'd modeled. He had sunglasses and a baseball cap on. He also had a salt and pepper red beard. He looked like he was in his 30s or 40s. I said yes, and he asked if he could take my pictures. I stupidly told him my plans to meet with B and D, and he said that he could tell that I'd modeled. I was getting more creeped out. He continued to talk to me and took a couple of photos. As he continued to talk to me, I got a bad feeling. My heart dropped into my stomach. I remembered what my parents had said about not talking to strangers, and all of my alarms were going off. He slightly moved his car, and it terrified me. He asked me to come over so we could get better pictures. Suddenly, it was like I was hyper-aware of everything. I told him that I had to meet my mom, which was different from what I had told him earlier, but I didn't even think of that. I was so terrified. He kept trying to get me closer to his car. I saw a woman watering her lawn, and I said that she was my mom, and I broke off into a sprint all the way home. I was shaking and crying by the time I got home. I told my mom, and she took me to the police station. To my shock, D and B were there. He'd gone to the JCC where I said I was meeting them. He took their pictures, which they thought was funny. We did a police sketch and found out that there was another girl he'd taken pictures of, and he'd actually tried to take her. They never caught him. And it also scares me thinking about this predator, and who knows what else is on the loose. I used to do DoorDash on the side just for some extra cash. Nothing too crazy, until a few months ago when something happened that I still can't stop thinking about. And to be honest, I haven't done a single delivery since. It was around 11 p.m. and I was finishing up my last order for the night. The delivery was in a quiet, upscale LA neighborhood, nothing out of the ordinary. I pull up, leave the car running like I always do, grab the food, and drop it off. It's super normal. No weird vibes from the customer or anything. But as I walk back to my car, something feels off. I can't explain it, but the air felt heavier. Like I could sense something was wrong before I even got to the door. I get in the driver's seat, close the door, and glance in the rearview mirror, and that's when I see him. There's a guy sitting in my back seat. Just sitting there. Hoodie pulled low over his face, completely still. My heart stopped. I was frozen staring at him through the mirror, trying to figure out how the hell he got in my car. I managed to stammer out, "Can I help you?" And that's when he leans forward, just a little, and I can finally see his eyes. They were wide and bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days. He leans back again and, in the calmest voice, says, "Drive." I don't know why, but I did. I started driving, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do. He didn't say anything else, just sat there completely calm while I drove through those dark streets, and I'm freaking out inside, thinking, this is it. This is how I'm going to get robbed, or worse. And then he tells me to turn down a side street. It's dark, barely any streetlights, and I'm just thinking, this is where it's going to go down. But right as we approach a gas station, well lit, a few people around, I slam on my brakes, throw the car in park, and jump out, screaming for help. The gas station clerk runs out, and I'm yelling that there's a guy in my back seat. But when we go back to the car, it's empty. The guy was gone. No sign of him anywhere. He just vanished. I have no idea how he got out so fast or where he went, but I didn't care. I got back in my car, locked the doors, and drove straight home. I replayed that night over and over in my head, and it still does not make sense. That was a month ago, and I haven't touched the DoorDash app since. I don't know if I ever will. It's not worth risking something like that happening again. Hey Raven, I found your channel a few months ago. I especially enjoy your glitch podcasts. I've even had some glitch experiences myself, but they've all been too minor or unimportant to share. This story, however, I wouldn't necessarily classify as a glitch, and is a different strange experience that I've had. Anyway, on to the story. I have a memory of waking up and being surrounded by this black abyss, sort of. I don't really know what to call it. It might have been some sort of tunnel, and I know I saw multiple tunnels in front of me. These tunnels had light shining from them with words above them. I remember knowing that this event took place before I was born, for context. And see, it gets much weirder. The tunnels had words above them that had mental and physical characteristics of what I was going to be like when I entered the world. It sounds crazy, I know, and somehow I could read this, and I immediately knew the context. I remember reading somewhere that almost no one besides, poets can read their dreams for some reason, so this probably wasn't a dream. But maybe it was. I don't know. I knew that I had limited time to choose the characteristics of myself, or the tunnel that I was going to enter. So, yeah, that's all I really remember of the memory. Also, I don't really remember this as being a dream experience. For one, how hard is it to remember dreams? Well, very. But the thing about almost no one being able to read in dreams kind of tripped me up. Anyways, I think that I've gone on for too long, and I hope you guys enjoyed this experience. Hey Raven, I love your podcast and I spontaneously decided to submit a story, so here I am. Now, let me explain my yard before I start. I have an acre of land, and I have a swamp really close to the fence that borders the deep woods. It's Virginia, so there are a ton of swamps, and the woods are cluttered with briars and bushes, and paired with fallen trees. It's hard to see past 200 to 300 feet deep into the woods, if you're looking at them from my yard. My yard is a perfect square, and my double wide is at the very front of my property. I have neighbors that share a dirt and gravel driveway, but I'm only close to one neighbor. But anyways, we have a lot of trees in our yard and the hill in the back right corner. And this is the closest part of our property to the swamp, which connects to my neighbor's pond. The swamp next to my yard is creepy, to say the least. Dead trees standing tall in the black water, the whole shebang. I was playing near the hill in my yard when I saw a small cream-colored thing sitting just outside my fence. I went to my fence to look at it, and being the dumb 11-year-old that I was, I jumped the fence to get a close look at it. Then I saw it move. It was a lot bigger than I thought originally. It was a weird thing. You know cockatoos? It looked like a cream-colored cockatoo with 4 legs. It was crouched down, its back to me. It had fancy-looking tail feathers that curled at the tips, and that couldn't be less than 2 feet long. I stepped on a twig and it startled it, and it started to run away. I chased after it, again like the dumb 11-year-old I was. I chased it until I ran behind a tree and it disappeared. I was knocked out of the daze that I'd been in while chasing it and looked around for it, and I realized that I was very close to stepping into the deep water of the swamp. I feel now that it had been trying to get me to fall into the water and drown. A couple of years later, when I was 13, I told my mom about it while we were talking about strange things that had happened on our property. Mind you, I had never told my parents this story before this discussion. My mom said that that was odd, and I asked why. She said that years before, she had seen the same thing, but it had flown above her when she was doing yard work outside, and it landed in the treetops in the woods. She thought that it was someone's pet that had gotten out, so she walked to the edge of our property and hopped the fence, thinking to go retrieve it so it didn't die. She snapped out of it when she realized it had disappeared. It was nearly impossible for something of that color to disappear in the Virginian woods, especially in spring when the woods were still bare. She had realized, just like I would years later, that she was close to stepping into the mud close to the swamp. I was shocked when she told me this story because, like I said, neither of us had ever said anything about it to anybody. I don't know what category this should go in, but here's my story. Okay, today I was with my dad, and he was driving me to hockey, and it's dark out, now in Canada, so I'm looking out my window and see a thing that looks like a siren head far away. It could have just been a big lamppost, but it had arms and stuff. But then, shortly after, the road turns onto a side road and has trees everywhere. I'm looking out my window again and see this black shadow man figure with a hat, a briefcase, and a suit. It looks like the thing I saw when I played Red Door, Yellow Door. I played that game like 4 times and saw the man everywhere, but that was a different story. I kept seeing that shadow man. I'm haunted by him ever since I played that game, but back to my story. I saw him like 7 times while driving. Then there was a little house with a small faint light, and I swear I saw something that looked like a Slender Man. And every time I see these creatures, something feels off. Like they aren't supposed to be in this world. Or they are, and only certain people can see them. I would like to believe that it is my imagination, but I think it's not. I see a lot, mostly the Shadow Man. I know that these may sound fake, but it's real, and I just cannot get these images out of my mind.